This video is going to talk about some interesting technological tools that you can use for qualitative transcription. So trying to get interviews or videotaped interactions or whatever you need to transcribe, just a few things that might help make that process a little bit easier. First, though, before we get started, it's important for especially new qualitative researchers to understand that nothing gets you more familiar with your data than transcribing it. The process of listening to it over and over again and putting it down on paper really gets you familiar in a way that nothing else can. It's also important to remember that there's no magic solution to the work of transcribing. So there's no technology at the moment that can take any audio recording or video and just make a transcript of it magically. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in doing transcribing. But again, since that's the way to get familiar with transcribing, that's not such a bad thing. Another thing to remember is to always double check and clean up your transcripts. To the extent that you use technology to help with your transcripts, because there's no sort of magic solution that will do it all for you, you have to always go back, double check, and make sure that you've accurately represented what the transcript or what the interview had to say. So with those caveats up front, let's talk about a few different things. The first that I'll talk about is voice recognition software and how you can use it to go from audio to typed transcripts just by you speaking to it. One of the things to remember, of course, is that voice recognition software can either be automatic, that doesn't need to be trained, or it could need to be trained. So something like Dragon Naturally Speaking generally wants you to train the software before you start using it. Automatic software, like the voice dictation that's built into your iPhone, your iPad, even sometimes your computer, those don't necessarily need to be trained. With any of those particular software setups, though, things like different voices, different accents, those kinds of things can throw off the transcription. So be aware of those things before you get started. So let me show you the basic setup for doing a voice to transcript process using just your computer and a speech recognition software. So I've got a blank text word processing kind of document. I've got my microphone here that I'm going to speak into, and you'll see that I've also got a recording over here that is from a sort of test interview. So I'll play a little piece of that.
So thanks for agreeing to interview with me.
So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. Period.
Okay. As I mentioned, I want
to... As you know, as I mentioned...
talk to you about your work. So maybe you could just...
I wanted to talk with you about your work, period. So maybe you could just...
start by telling me what you've been working on recently.
Start by telling me what you've been working on recently.
I've recently just sent a big project.
Well, I've recently just sent a big project. And of course, you can go on from there, continuing to talk to the microphone and have it actually transcribe the things that are being dictated. As you could see when I was doing that, it doesn't always get all of the words correct. Also, sometimes you'll have a program that will stop or time out after a while as it buffers what you've been saying to try to translate it back. In those cases, try to be patient and work with it. Of course, another way that you can go about doing this kind of transcript is instead of having it on the screen and having to stop all the time, you can have a set of earphones or headphones on that you can just speak or repeat the things that are going on in the headphones as you do the dictation. A newer series of iPad and iPhone and Android applications actually allows you to do it right in particular apps. I'm going to show you one called Voice Recorder. This one is for iOS and for iPad. Android may have some different things. You might also be able to find some apps that are specifically for a Mac or for a PC that might do the same kinds of functions. So this is what it looks like when you open up Voice Recorder in iOS. This is on my iPhone, and it always comes up to this home screen which has previous recordings on it. I can push this button down here, the little microphone button, and it will open up what looks like an old audio cassette tape recorder, which pleases me very much because that's what I learned how to use when I was just starting out in qualitative research. You can tap there in the middle and give it a name of whoever you're transcribing from. This one's just going to be a test. And then I can just hit the record button down there. And you can see the wheels start to spin just like the old tape recorders. And you just have the iPhone sitting between you and the person that you're interviewing. They can see that it's recording, you can see that it's recording, and you just talk into it until you are done. And then you hit stop. You can hit done. And you'll see that that new test file has been uploaded onto that home screen, and then you can go in and listen to it again if you want to. It's got the nice little visual monitor for the recording quality. But I'll look at a recording that I had from earlier, and this was from a sort of test interview that I did. The neat thing about this is that in addition to being able to listen to it back, and you can also down there at the bottom, you can increase its speed or decrease the speed down to half speed. So if you wanted to transcribe manually just from this, you could certainly do that by slowing it down or speeding it up if you're a faster typer. But the really neat part is hitting the button in the middle for transcribe. And when you touch the little button in the middle of the screen again and pick out the language that you'd like to use, it's got a pretty good amount of language choices. I'm going to pick English US. And what you'll see is it starts to transcribe straight from the audio that you recorded. And you can see the progress down there at the bottom as it goes. It's not perfect, of course, and it takes a little bit longer than the actual recording length. So it takes a while to do the transcription. What it does is it sends the audio up to Apple just like it would for Siri or for any other dictation within any other applications that you'd be using. And it has to sort of go up and back to the Apple server. So that's why it takes a little bit longer than it might normally. So once you have it finished up, just like I have in this earlier transcript, you can simply tap in there somewhere and choose Select All. And then you can copy it and paste it into a different application, or you can also look for the Share button, and you can send it as a text message, as an email message. You can add it to a notes program, lots of other options for being able to share it. In this case, I am going to send it as mail. Write to myself. And that should be on its way. Make sure you save it. And then the next time you want to open the file up, you'll have that transcription already right there waiting on you. So once you've transferred the text from your transcription in Voice Recorder, you can just paste it into any word processing document like a Microsoft Word, Mac Pages, and then it's time to make sure, again, to go double check through and make corrections so that you get as accurate a transcript as possible. So I've made the words big here so that you can actually see what's going on. But just go ahead and listen to the recording.
Thanks for agreeing to interview with me
and
today.
see where the mistakes
As
are.
I mentioned, I want to talk to you about your work. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on recently.
Well, I've recently just sent a big project back to the publisher. I'm very excited about that. I've been working on it for over a decade, and it's one of those that began with a question, which is I was living in Australia in 2003, and there was a lot of discussion in the air around me about apology. Sure, I'm very excited about that. I've been working on it for over a decade, and it's one of those that began with a question, which is I was living in Australia in 2003, and there was a lot.
So that's Voice Recorder. Next, I want to talk a little bit about a piece of software, and there are several like it, a piece of software called HyperTRANSCRIBE that's specifically made to help you do transcription. So when you first open HyperTRANSCRIBE, it comes up with this window and asks you if you want to make a new transcription document or open up a document that you've worked on before. I'll go ahead and make a new one. This is the basic window for the transcription. It asks you to open a media file. You can do sound, you can also do video. I am going to open up a sound file for that test document. And it will come up with the timing of particular loops of the actual audio recording that you want to make, or that you've already made and that you want to make a transcription of. And it's also got this sort of standard play bar that you'll see for audio and video. And here's the area over here where you can actually do the typing. Now, the nice thing about HyperTRANSCRIBE is that it will loop the playback over and over until you tell it to go forward. And there are a number of different shortcuts that you can use to let it know when to start or stop the recording. So you can hit shift space to do that. You can hit tab to go on to the next segment, so on and so forth. And other keyboard shortcuts that you can use so that you don't actually have to take your hands off the keyboard, which is really, really nice because one of the really hard things about doing transcription manually is having to play the recording, stop the recording, do the typing, rewind, play the recording, stop the recording, type, rewind, and so on and so forth. So this allows you to be able to do all of that with just your hands staying on the keyboard. So it goes a lot faster. And plus that looping automatically sends the tape back, so you don't have to actually worry about doing the stop and rewind, stop and rewind, stop and rewind over and over. The computer will just do that for you. So I'll just type a little bit and you can get a sense of how this actually goes.
So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. You know, as I mentioned, I want to talk to you about your work. You know, as I mentioned, I want to talk to you about your work. You know, as talk to you about your work. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on recently. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on recently. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on recently. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on recently.
I've recently just sent a big project back to the publisher. I've recently just sent a big project back to the publisher. I've recently just sent a big project back to the publisher. I'm very excited about that. I've been working on it for over a decade, and it's one of those that began. Very excited about that. I've been working on it for over a decade, and it's one of those that began. Very excited about that. I've been working on it for over a decade. It's one of those that began with a question, which is I was living in Australia in 2003, and with a question, which is I was living in Australia in 2003, and with a question, which is I was living in Australia in 2003, and with a question, which is I was living in Australia in 2003, and with a question, which is I'm.
Another thing that's really nice about HyperTRANSCRIBE is that you can also set up some shortcuts of your own. So you can control, when you go into preferences, how long the segments are that play when you're advancing the tape, how long it can go back when it's looping, that kind of stuff. But you can also set up particular commands for, like, if you have segments of tape that are always coming up, like if somebody has a verbal tick, like they always say, over and over, you could set up a specific command and do command 3 instead of having to type out every time. Or when you're labeling the speakers in a text, you can set up command 1, command 2 for interviewee, and so on and so forth. So that's a really nice feature that can help save you some keystrokes as you're going along doing your transcripts. So that's HyperTRANSCRIBE. It's an application that you pay for. I think it's about $99. There may be student licensing prices. I'm not quite sure about that. But there's a free version that has some advantages and has some disadvantages. So let me walk you through those. This browser-based transcribing software called Otranscribe. So here's just an open web browser. I type in otranscribe.com and it comes up to this particular page. You can click on Start Transcribing, and what you'll get is a file that, when you open it up, if you've been working on one that's in the browser cache, it will come back up. Now, the thing about Otranscribe and why it can work in a browser is that it saves the material and the recording to the browser cache itself. So if you're not working on your own computer, it's still saving the information, so it's not confidential or secure. So you need to be aware of that. You also need to be aware that if something happens to the browser, like it crashes in the midst of working on things, you could be actually losing all the data that you've been working on thus far. It does have a way, though, that you can export a text file, or you can send the transcript to your Google Drive if you have Google Drive, but you can save it as a plain text file and do that, frequently as you're going along. One of the nice things about this is if you go to the settings, you can create your own keyboard shortcuts. So you can customize the way that you want to work with Otranscribe to make it a little easier on you. So for instance, play pause as a default is by using the escape key. For me, that's a bit of a long reach to get to the escape key, so I usually like to use the tab key instead. So then we can leave there. It will come up with a default template, if you will, that has some text in it. All you have to do is just put your cursor in there and you can start typing from wherever you are. Now you choose an audio or video file. I'll just use that same interview demonstration that I was using from before. One of the nice things about it is you can control the speed as well, so you can slow it down so that if you're not the quickest typist out there, you can go ahead and slow that down a little bit. You can also use the function key. So as you can see, like to go forward or to go backwards, you can use F1 or F2 to control it, and tab or escape or whatever you've set to play and pause as well. So just like HyperTRANSCRIBE, you can do basically all of the transcribing that you need to do without ever having your fingers leave the keyboard. So we'll just start playing this file and take just a few minutes to do that.
So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. As as I mentioned, I want to talk to you about your work. Talk to you about your work. Start by telling me what you've been working on recently.
Well, I've recently just sent a big
One nice thing about Otranscribe that's the same in HyperTRANSCRIBE is you can put in time codes. In Otranscribe, there's a little icon over here that if you just click it, it'll insert a timestamp that corresponds with where you are in the audio recording. Now this is nice because if you go forward and do some transcribing,
and I started getting interested, first of all, in how literature. At time.
So we'll put in another timestamp. Now you'll see where we are in the tape right now. If we go back and click on the timestamp, it goes back to the part of the tape where we were before. This can be really helpful in terms of analysis, being able to go back and forth to where you are in the tape and be able to find the full context of a quote later on. So again, what you want to do is make sure that you're exporting this frequently so that you don't have any accidents that crash and lose data for you. So that's otranscribe.com. Again, it's a free service, so the price is definitely right, but just make sure that you're saving a lot and make sure that you're not using sensitive data, especially if you're not working from your own computer. The last thing that I want to talk to you about is transcribing that can be done within qualitative research software. Now, particularly MaxQDA is one that has this particular functionality. So I want to show this to you as and its functionality so that you can do all of your qualitative research functions within your software package rather than having to create, say, a separate file in Microsoft Word or a separate file in HyperTRANSCRIBE or whatever you happen to be doing. Okay, so here's what you see when you open up MaxQDA at the beginning. You'll pick out your username, which is helpful if you're using Teams, and you can either create or open a document. We're going to create a new document here, and what will happen is that it creates a new project. We're going to call this test. I'll save it to the desktop. And you'll see that it sets up a document system for you and a code system for you. There's a couple of other windows that we can talk about a little bit later. We can close down this retrieve segments and focus more of our attention here in the document browser. And what will happen is we'll use the control key and hit documents and go down. There's lots of ways you can either create documents or import documents, but we're going to actually transcribe an audio or video file. And you know it's working because what you're going to do is it comes up asking you where the file is that you want to do. We're going to use that same demo. There's a number of different formats you can use. It prepares the media file, and then you know that it's working in transcription mode because it comes up with this window over here, and it can show you, it can change the volume, change the playing speed, just like we were looking at with Otranscribe and with HyperTRANSCRIBE, and the rewind interval for each time it goes back. So what we can do is you'll see that the media buttons have popped up here, and it shows where you are on the time, those kinds of things. So we will start playing and just start typing.
So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. As I mentioned, I want to talk to you about your work. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on recently. So thanks for agreeing to interview with me today. As I mentioned, I want to talk to you about your work. So maybe you could just start by telling me what you've been working on.
So you'll notice that when I hit the return key just then, it started a new time code here, a new sort of a turn, if you will, within the transcript. So now I can start using the name of the participant.
I've recently just sent big project.
So what's nice about this, we can end the transcript. But again, if you want to go back to a certain time code, you just click on
for agreeing to interview with me today.
That time,
and
it jumps right back to that part in the tape.
Recently.
I've recently just sent big project back to the publisher.
Then you're ready to go ahead and just code that document just as you would any other document that you were putting into your qualitative research software. So if you wanted to make a code out of agreeing to interview, you can code with a new code, call it agreement. You can pick a color, maybe red. And you can see that the codes start popping up here, and that's how you'll go about doing the coding once you've got the transcript actually in the into the software. So it's really nice actually to have MaxQDA have a transcription software right in it, so that you can go ahead and create those documents and listen to them without having to change around from software to software and pay, frankly, for different types of software. You can have it all integrated together. So that was MaxQDA. It's really nice to, again, have that integrated right into your software package so you don't have to switch in and out. At the same time, it doesn't have some of the functionality that you might find with HyperTRANSCRIBE, like the looping and things like that. Although you can hook up a foot pedal to it. For those of you who have maybe done transcribing before, you know that there are foot pedals you can buy to hook up to your computer that can do the stopping and starting without you having to use your hands and take them off the keyboard. So those are just a few ideas for technology that you can use to help make transcribing a little bit easier. Again, there's no magic bullets, and you still have to do some work to make sure that they're cleaned up and accurate. But at the same time, modern technology can really help make it a lot easier, help with a lot of the repetitive motion and stress on your hands and those kinds of things. So I hope you'll take advantage of some of those.